On our wedding night, my husband went outside to answer a strange phone call. My sil rushed into the room, her face pale, handing me 20,000 USD. Back door. Run now. I stared at the cash in my manicured hands, the ink smelling of fresh terror against the scent of white roses. Minutes earlier, I had been Thea Vane, the luckiest orphan in the state, securing a fairy tale ending. Now, looking at Alara's trembling lips, I realized the fairy tale was actually a trap. Only an hour ago, I was sitting on the edge of a four-poster bed in the Vane estate's master suite. The room was larger than the entire foster home I grew up in, filled with soft golden light and expensive silence. I touched the silk sheets, trying to let the reality sink in. I had no family, no wealth, and no powerful name. Yet Liam Vane had chosen me. I thought I had finally found safety, but I was just sitting inside a very expensive cage. The shift happened when Liam's phone buzzed against the mahogany nightstand. He glanced at the screen, and the warmth drained from his face instantly. He walked onto the balcony, locking the glass door behind him with a sharp click. Through the sheer curtains, I watched his posture transform. His shoulders hunched, and his head bowed, as if the voice on the other end was physically striking him. He didn't look like a groom anymore. He looked like a man receiving his final sentence. That was when the heavy oak door to the hallway burst open. Alara, Liam's younger sister, stumbled inside. She wasn't wearing her bridesmaid dress anymore. She was in dark jeans and a hoodie, clutching a thick envelope. She didn't look at me, she looked through me, her eyes darting to the balcony where Liam stood. She shoved the bundle into my hands, her fingernails digging into my skin. Her voice was a broken whisper, terrified and urgent. "He cannot find you here, Thea." I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Run where?" "Why?" I stammered, the heavy bundle of bills feeling like lead in my hands. Before she could answer, the handle of the balcony door rattled. Liam was coming back in. Alara's eyes went wide with panic. "Hide it," she hissed, backing toward the door. "Trust no one? Not even him." She vanished into the hallway, just as the glass door slid open, letting the cold night air inside. Liam stepped back into the room. A smile plastered on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked at the empty spot where Alara had stood, then at me. I quickly shoved the money under the pillow, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just business?" he said, his voice flat. He moved toward me, but the tenderness was gone. The room felt cold. I knew then that my honeymoon had ended before it even began. Sunlight flooded the room, mocking the dread sitting heavy in my stomach. I hadn't slept. Every creak sounding like footsteps coming to drag me away. Liam was gone, his side of the bed cold and made with military precision. The room felt too large without him. I checked the pillowcase instantly. The envelope of cash was still there, a lumpy secret against the down feathers. I dressed quickly in something stiff and formal, armoring myself for the performance waiting downstairs. The dining room echoed with the sharp clink of silver against fine china. Julian Vane sat at the head of the table, hidden behind a Wall Street newspaper, like a king in his fortress. He didn't acknowledge me when I entered, nor did he lower the paper. The air smelled of burnt coffee and expensive cologne. I took my seat beside an empty chair, my hands trembling in my lap. In this house, silence was clearly a weapon used to maim. Beatrice, my new mother-in-law, offered a thin, practiced smile. Her eyes, however, were cold, tracking my every movement like a hawk. She was beautiful but terrifying. "Good morning, Thea," she said softly, her voice devoid of warmth. "I hope you found our hospitality sufficient." Before I could answer, she took a delicate sip of tea. "Loyalty is the foundation of this family, dear. We value discretion above all else." The threat hung in the air, barely disguised as advice. Liam walked in from the kitchen, pouring more coffee. He kissed my cheek, but his lips felt dry and impersonal, like paper. "Where is Alara?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I wanted to thank her for last night. Lamb didn't look at me, focusing on his cup. "She's ill," he said sharply. "Migraine? She won't be down today. She gets dramatic when she's off her medication." He was lying. I knew it. And he knew I knew it. As soon as the men left, the house fell into a suffocating slumber. Beatrice retreated to her garden, leaving me unsupervised. I didn't go to the library as expected. Instead, I slipped off my heels and crept up the servants' staircase toward Elara's wing. The hallway was dim, lined with portraits of ancestors who seemed to frown at my intrusion. I reached her door and turned the handle slowly, holding my breath. It was unlocked but silent. Alara wasn't there. Her bed was stripped, the mattress bare and accusing. Drawers were pulled open, clothes scattered across the floor like colorful debris from a storm. The violence of the search was unmistakable. Someone had been looking for something, and they hadn't been gentle. Panic rose in my throat, tasting like bile. I knelt by the air vent near the baseboard, remembering a childhood hiding spot. The screws were loose. I pried the grate open, my fingers scraping against the cold metal. Deep inside the dusty duct sat a small, leather-bound notebook. I pulled it out, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. Flipping past pages of teenage angst, I found the most recent entry, the ink barely dry. "Dad knows Liam saw it all. He is breaking him. If I don't warn her, she is next." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. This wasn't just a dysfunctional family. It was a conspiracy written in blood. I shoved the leather notebook into the waistband of my skirt and hurried back to the suite. The hallway seemed longer now, the portraits watching with judgment. Once inside, I locked the heavy door and pulled the curtains, shut against the bright afternoon sun. My hands shook as I opened my laptop. The screen glow was the only light in the dim room. I needed answers that Alara's frantic scribbles couldn't give me. I typed, "Vane Construction," and hit enter. The search results were a wall of polished propaganda. Article after article praised Liam Vane as a visionary, a philanthropist, and a titan of industry. There were photos of him cutting ribbons, shaking hands with senators, and standing proudly beside a younger Liam. Everything looked pristine, curated, and untouchable. It was a digital fortress designed to hide cracks. But Alara's diary mentioned a specific date, 3 years ago. I refined the search, scrolling past the paid advertisements and official press releases. On page 10 of the search results, I found a broken link to a defunct local news blog. The headline was chillingly simple. "The silence at Project Horizon." My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked the cached version, waiting for the pixelated text to load. It described a luxury condo development that had been erased from the company portfolio. No ribbons were cut there. Instead, the article detailed a catastrophic scaffolding collapse that killed 5 undocumented workers. I read the text twice, nausea rising in my throat. The report claimed the materials were substandard, a cost-cutting measure authorized by senior management. Families were paid cash settlements to sign non-disclosure agreements. The police investigation was closed within 48 hours due to insufficient evidence. It was a massacre swept under a rug made of money. But the article itself wasn't the smoking gun. I scrolled down to the comment section, where a single, angry user had left a message. The comment was timestamped 3 years ago. The site supervisor wasn't a random hire. It was the chairman's son. He signed the safety checks an hour before it fell. The room spun. Liam wasn't just a bystander, or a victim of his father's bullying. He was the on-site authority. He had signed the paper that killed those men. The gentleman who bought me flowers and promised me a family had built our future on a foundation of corpses. I slammed the laptop shut, pushing it away like it was burning. The $20,000 under my pillow suddenly made terrifying sense. It wasn't a gift. It was blood money. Or maybe it was hush money that Alara stole. I paced the room, the plush carpet feeling like quicksand. I had married into a crime scene. If Julian knew I had found this, I wouldn't just be divorced. I would be another accident erased from the public record. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk, startling me so badly I gasped. The screen showed. Unknown caller. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the red button, but instinct told me to answer. I swiped right and held the device to my ear, not speaking. "Don't say my name." A woman's voice whispered, low and hurried. It was Beatrice. "Meet me at the boathouse in 20 minutes. Use the service path. If you want to survive, come alone." The service path was overgrown. Wet ferns soaking the hem of my skirt with every step. Fog rolled off the lake, obscuring the boathouse until I was nearly upon it. It was a rotting wooden structure. Peeling paint exposing gray timber, far removed from the manicured perfection of the main estate. I checked behind me constantly, the silence of the woods feeling heavy and watchful. I wasn't just walking to a meeting, I was walking into the belly of the beast. Beatrice stood by a dusty window, smoking a thin cigarette with shaking hands. She wasn't wearing her pearls or her armor of indifference today. She looked older, her face etched with an exhaustion that makeup usually hid. "You came?" she said, not turning around to face me. "You are brave. Or foolish. In this family, there isn't much difference." She finally looked at me, and her eyes weren't predatory anymore. They were pleading. "Julian suspects Alara talked to you. You don't have much time. Why did you bring me here?" I demanded, crossing my arms to hide my trembling. Beatrice exhaled a plume of gray smoke that twisted in the stagnant air. "The investigation into Project Horizon is quietly reopening next month," she said flatly. Julian needed Liam to look stable. Responsible. A married man with a bright future is harder to indict than a reckless bachelor. The words hit me like a physical blow. My wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a PR stunt. I stepped closer, anger suddenly overriding my fear. "So any bride would have done." Beatrice shook her head slowly, dropping her cigarette and crushing it under her heel. "Not anyone, Thea. You, an orphan. No powerful father to ask questions. No siblings to miss you if you suddenly went on a long, permanent vacation." The cruelty of it stole my breath. I wasn't chosen for my heart or my beauty. I was chosen because I was disposable. I was the perfect victim. "Does Liam know?" I whispered, the betrayal burning my throat. "He loves you," Beatrice said, her voice cracking. "That part is real. But he is weak. Julian broke him the night the scaffolding fell. He made Liam watch the bodies being pulled out. He convinced him that silence was the only way to survive." She reached out, gripping my cold hands. "My son is a hostage in his own life. He wanted to save you, but he doesn't know how to stand up." "Then help us leave," I pleaded. Beatrice pulled back, looking at the door as if Julian might burst through the wood. "I can't leave. Julian owns everything, even my debts, but you can stop him." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. "This opens a ventilation room behind his study. There is a safe. He keeps leverage on everyone there, including the Horizon tapes." She pressed the cool metal into my palm. It felt like a grenade. "Why give this to me?" I asked, staring at the tarnished key. "Because he watches me too closely," she whispered. "I can't get near that room without security knowing. But tonight, during the gala preparation, the sensors are down for maintenance." She pushed me toward the exit. "You were brought here to be a shield, Thea. But a shield can also be a weapon." I stepped back into the fog, clutching the key. I wasn't just a bride anymore, I was the executioner. The mansion buzzed with the chaotic energy of the catering staff downstairs, providing the perfect cover of noise. I slipped through the shadows of the upper corridor, the brass key heavy and warm in my pocket. Reaching Alara's door, I didn't knock. I turned the handle and slipped inside, locking it instantly behind me. The room was dark, smelling of stale air and fear. Alara was sitting on the floor by the window, hugging her knees, staring at the driveway. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. She jumped when I whispered her name, her eyes wide and glassy in the moonlight. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, scrambling backward. "If he finds us together, he'll separate us. Permanently." I didn't back down. I pulled her leather notebook from my waistband and tossed it onto the rug between us. "I know about Project Horizon, Alara. I know about the blood on Liam's hands." Her breath hitched. The fear in her eyes shifted into something sharper. Recognition. We were past the point of protecting secrets. "It doesn't matter what you know," Alara whispered, tears spilling over. "We can't prove it. The safe is biometric. Only Dad can open it." I stepped closer and held up the heavy brass key Beatrice had given me. The metal caught the sliver of moonlight, glowing dull gold. "Your mother disagrees," I said. "She says the sensors are down tonight." Alara stared at the key, her trembling stopping abruptly. For the first time, I saw the daughter of a titan, calculated and cold. "Beatrice gave you that." Alara stood up, wiping her face with her sleeve. "If Mom gave you that, she's desperate." "Which means we have a window of maybe 20 minutes. She moved to the door, listening to the rhythm of the house. "The catering trucks are unloading at the north entrance. The security detail will be distracted checking the inventory." She turned back to me, her voice steady. "I'll trigger the silent alarm in the garage. It draws the guards away from the study. You have to go in alone. The key only opens the ventilation access." I realized, dread pooling in my stomach. There is still a digital keypad on the inner vault. Alara shook her head, a bitter smile touching her lips. "Dad is arrogant, Thea. He thinks he's untouchable. He uses numbers that remind him of his victories." She looked me dead in the eye. "Try the date the scaffolding fell. October 14th. To us, it's a tragedy. To him, it's the day he proved he could get away with murder." We moved into the hallway, using the servants' shadows to mask our approach. The floorboards groaned underfoot, each sound amplifying my heartbeat until it thundered in my ears. Alara squeezed my arm at the top of the stairs, then vanished toward the garage to start the diversion. I was alone. I crept toward the heavy oak doors of Julian's study, the brass key slippery in my sweating palm. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty, it was waiting. I inserted the key into the hidden panel. The panel slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the steel face of the wall safe. I punched in 1014. A green light flashed, mocking my terror. The door swung open. But there were no stacks of cash or piles of dossiers inside. Instead, a single framed photograph of Liam sat on the velvet shelf. Confused, I reached for it and felt something taped to the back. It was a USB drive labeled insurance. We had the evidence. But the heavy tires crunching outside meant Julian had just arrived home. The sound of a heavy car door slamming echoed through the grand foyer below, freezing the blood in my veins. I shoved the cold USB drive into my bra, the plastic biting against my skin. There was no time to lock the safe or reset the painting. Footsteps hammered on the marble stairs, rapid and angry, not the slow gait of a man at peace. I scrambled backward, putting the heavy desk between me and the door just as Alara burst in, breathless and pale. She had failed to intercept him. "He knows," Alara wheezed, her eyes darting to the open wall panel. Before I could answer, the double doors swung open with enough force to crack the plaster. Liam Vane stood there, his silhouette filling the frame like a dark omen. He didn't look at his daughter, his eyes were locked on the safe. He took in the exposed metal, the displaced photo, and finally me. The mask of the benevolent philanthropist was gone. In its place was a predator looking at trapped prey. "You are a very disappointing investment," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He stepped into the room, closing the doors behind him with a definitive click. I offered you a life most women would kill for. All I asked for was gratitude and silence. He extended a hand, palm up, expecting obedience. Give me what you took. Now. My knees shook, but I pressed my back against the bookshelf. I saw the video? I lied, bluffing confidence I didn't feel. It's already uploaded to the cloud. Julian laughed, a dry, humorless sound that chilled the room. You're lying. You don't have the access codes for the cloud. He lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his age. Elora screamed and threw herself in his path to protect me, but he backhanded her without hesitation. The sound of flesh striking flesh was sickeningly loud. Elora crumbled to the rug, clutching her cheek. I gasped, paralyzed by the sheer brutality of it. This wasn't discipline, it was raw, unfiltered hatred. Rage replaced my fear. I grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the desk and swung it, but Julian caught my wrist mid-air. His grip was like iron, twisting my arm until I dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor, spraying amber liquid over Elora's sobbing form. You think you can fight me in my own house? He snarled, pulling me close enough to smell the scotch on his breath. I built this world. I can bury you in it without leaving a trace. The door handle rattled violently, followed by a shoulder slamming against the wood. Dad? Liam's voice muffled through the oak. Julian ignored him, tightening his grip on my throat. The lock gave way with a splintering crack, and Liam stumbled into the room. He stopped dead, processing the scene, his sister bleeding on the floor, his father strangling his wife. For a second, he looked like the broken boy Beatrice described, paralyzed by a lifetime of fear. Then, he looked at my terrified eyes. Let her go, Liam said, his voice low and trembling. Julian didn't release me, he just sneered at his son. Go to your room, Liam. This doesn't concern you. I am cleaning up your mess again. That was the spark. The trembling in Liam's hands stopped. He didn't see a father anymore. He saw the monster who had ruined his life. No. Liam roared, stepping over the shattered glass. You aren't cleaning anything. You are destroying us. He charged, leading with his shoulder. Liam tackled Julian. The momentum sending them both crashing into the heavy mahogany desk. Papers and lamps flew into the air, raining down like confetti. The grip on my throat vanished, and I collapsed, gasping for air. I watched in horror as they rolled on the floor, trading punches. It wasn't a fight, it was an exorcism. Liam was purging years of silence with every strike, but Julian was fighting dirty, gouging at eyes and throat. The illusion of the perfect family was physically tearing itself apart. Julian managed to kick Liam off, scrambling backward toward the panic button, under the desk. Security, he screamed, his voice cracking. Intruders in the study! Armed and dangerous! Shoot to kill. He slammed his palm against the hidden alarm. Red emergency lights began to pulse in the corners of the room, bathing the violence in a strobe of blood. Colored warning. The wail of a siren erupted throughout the mansion. He wasn't calling for help, he was signing our death warrants. Liam wiped blood from his split lip, looking at the flashing lights with wild eyes. He knew what those sirens meant. The private security team wasn't police, they were mercenaries on Julian's payroll. He grabbed a heavy letter opener, standing between us and his father, who was already reaching for a gun in the drawer. Liam didn't look back at me, but his voice cut through the chaos, clear and desperate. As he prepared to die for us, he screamed the only command that mattered. Run. We scrambled down the service stairs, the red emergency lights pulsing like a heartbeat in overdrive. Elora limped, clutching her bruised ribs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Above us, the sounds of smashing furniture ceased, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots on marble. Julian's private army was sweeping the floor. Keep moving, I whispered, gripping her arm tight. I could feel the USB drive against my skin, burning like a brand. We weren't just running for our lives. We were carrying Liam's freedom. We burst into the kitchen, expecting an ambush, but found Beatrice standing by the loading dock. She held a keychain, her face set in stone. She didn't waste time with hugs. "The north gate is compromised," she said, unlocking the steel door. "Go through the orchard to the old stone wall. It's the only blind spot left." She shoved us into the cool night air. As we ran, I heard the deadbolt slide home behind us. She was locking herself in with the monsters to buy us time. The orchard was a nightmare of wet grass and grasping roots. I kicked off my heels, running barefoot through the mud, dragging Alara. Flashlight beams cut through the fog behind us, sweeping back and forth like searchlights. "There!" a deep voice shouted, followed by the terrifying rack of a slide. They weren't trying to capture us. Julian's order had been clear. A bullet struck the tree trunk inches from my head, showering us in bark. We dove into the tall ferns, heart rates synchronized in absolute terror. "The wall," Alara gasped, pointing to a crumbling stone barrier shrouded in ivy. It was 8 feet high and slick with moss. I laced my fingers together, creating a step. "Go," I ordered. She hesitated, looking back toward the house, toward Liam. "He told us to run," I said, my voice harsh with panic. She stepped into my hands, and I heaved her upward. She scrambled over, dropping to the other side. As I clawed my way up, a second shot rang out, echoing horribly through the woods. I tumbled down the embankment onto the asphalt of the old county road. My knees scraped raw, but I didn't feel the pain. We were out, but we were exposed. The road was a river of darkness, surrounded by dense forest. "We need a car," Alara cried, clutching her side. Far in the distance, headlights pierced the gloom, growing larger. It could be help, or it could be Julian's security team, circling the perimeter. We had to gamble. I stepped into the lane, waving my arms frantically. The vehicle roared closer, blinding us with high beams. Brakes screeched, the smell of burning rubber filling the air as a battered pickup truck skidded to a halt. An older man rolled down the window, eyeing our torn clothes and bloodied faces. "Please," I begged, rushing to the door. "We've been attacked. Take us to the police." He looked at Alara's bruising, then unlocked the doors. "Get in," he growled. As we peeled away, I saw a black SUV burst out of the Vane estate gates behind us. The truck cab smelled of stale tobacco and sawdust, the most comforting scent I had ever known. I watched the side mirror, praying the SUV wouldn't follow. The driver pushed the old engine, sensing the danger radiating off us. Alara wept silently, her head against the cool glass. I pulled the USB drive from my dress, gripping it until my knuckles turned white. This small piece of plastic had cost us everything. If the data was corrupted, or if the police were bought, we were dead. The police station was a harsh awakening of fluorescent lights and indifferent faces. We burst in like fugitives, barefoot and covered in mud. The desk sergeant looked up, bored until I slammed the USB drive onto the counter. "My name is Thea Vane," I announced. "This drive contains evidence of murder committed by Julian Vane, and right now, he is trying to kill his son." The boredom vanished from the sergeant's face. He picked up the phone, his eyes widening as he dialed urgency into the line. 10 minutes later, we were in a cramped office, watching the video play on a dusty monitor. The captain watched in silence as the footage showed the scaffolding collapse and Julian calmly ordering the cover. "Up." "Jesus," the captain muttered, scrubbing his face. "This goes all the way to the top." He turned to the dispatch radio, barking orders that made my knees weak with relief. "All units, proceed to the Vane estate. Suspect is armed. Possible hostage situation. Proceed with extreme caution." The cavalry was finally coming, just as the adrenaline began to fade. The precinct doors swung open. A man in an immaculately tailored suit walked in, followed by 2 assistants carrying briefcases. He didn't look at the police. He looked at the clock. "I represent Mr. Vane," the lawyer announced smoothly, ignoring our muddy presence. My client has suffered a psychotic break. We are filing for immediate psychiatric custody. My heart stopped. They weren't fighting the charges, they were changing the battlefield. Julian wasn't going to prison. He was going to a hospital. The lawyer placed a thick medical file on the captain's desk, his smile predatory and assured. Mr. Vane is a victim of his own fractured mind. He purred, smoothing his silk tie with a practiced hand. He requires immediate treatment, not incarceration. The air in the room grew heavy with the suffocating smell of defeat. I looked at Alara, who was trembling, then reached into my waistband. I pulled out the leather notebook Alara had found, opening it to the pages Julian had written. Madness is impulse, I said, sliding the book across the metal table. This is a strategy guide. The captain opened the book, his eyes scanning the precise, angular script under the harsh fluorescent lights. He stopped at the page I had marked with a bloody fingerprint. Use insanity defense if caught. He read aloud, his voice dangerously flat. Prepare medical records in advance. The lawyer's smug expression dissolved instantly, replaced by a pale look of panic. He reached for the book, but the captain slammed his hand down. This proves premeditation, the officer said, picking up his handcuffs. Your client isn't sick. He's just evil. The gambit had failed completely. 6 months later, the Vane empire was nothing but dust and endless legal briefs. The assets were frozen. The mansion was seized, and Julian was rotting in a maximum security cell awaiting trial. I walked into the small rehabilitation center garden, spotting Liam on a weathered wooden bench. He leaned heavily on a cane, his leg still healing from the gunshot wound he took that night. He looked thinner, stripped of his tailored suits and arrogance, wearing simple cotton. He didn't look like a prince anymore. He looked like a survivor. I sat beside him, resting my head on his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. The silence between us was heavy like it had been in the mansion. It was comfortable and real. The lawyers finalized the settlement today, Liam said quietly, watching a bird peck at the grass. We have enough to start over. Small. But ours? He turned to me, his eyes clear for the first time since our wedding. I have nothing left to offer you, Thea. No estate. No fortune. Just the wreckage of a man. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver band, devoid of diamonds or pretension. I gave you a life built on lies, he whispered, his hand shaking slightly as he held it out. I want to give you one built on truth. Will you marry me again? I looked at the ring, thinking of the $20,000 I had left behind in the mansion. That money had been a bribe for my silence. This cheap piece of metal was a promise of my voice. I took the ring and slid it onto my finger, where it fit perfectly. We'll use what's left for the families, I said softly. The Horizon victims. Liam nodded, tears finally spilling over and washing away the last of the Vane legacy. We were starting with nothing but a clean conscience, which was worth more than the entire inheritance. I looked at the man I loved, stripped of his empire but finally whole, and realized I didn't need a fairy tale. I just needed him.